Hello, everyone. I'm Natalie Turvey, President and Executive Director of the Canadian Journalism Foundation. Thank you for joining us today, and welcome to our first J Talk of 2026, the AI Newsroom Revolution, Building Tomorrow's Newsroom Today. I'm joining you from Toronto on the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. We are grateful to live and work on these lands. First off, a big CJF thank you to TD Bank Group, our exclusive J Talk series sponsor, for making timely conversations like this one possible. Thanks also to Cision, our in-kind supporter, and to CPAC, our broadcast partner for these events. At the CJF, we spend a lot of time examining what AI means for journalism through our programs, research, and training. I recently joined TD's Banking on AI podcast to talk about how newsrooms are already working with AI and how, when used responsibly with humans in the loop, it can be a super partner for smaller and local outlets. If you want more on AI and journalism, you'll find a link to the episode on our event page. Journalism is being rebuilt in real time, and AI is one of the most powerful tools in the construction kit. Newsrooms are using AI to analyze massive volumes of documents, uncover patterns humans might miss, understand audience engagement, and share information faster across platforms and languages. But every breakthrough raises important questions, like what will it take for the newsrooms of tomorrow to use AI in ways audiences can trust? What does AI mean for the next generation of journalists coming up? And as platforms increasingly summarize journalism without sending readers back to the source, how do news organizations sustain themselves? That's just some of what we'll be digging into today. We'll have time for your questions, so please submit them using the Q&A tab on your screen. While today's talk opens our season, the conversation continues. On March 5th in Toronto, we'll host a candid discussion with Richard Gingras, former Global VP of News at Google, in conversation with Angela Pacenza from the Globe and Mail. Drawing on his experience both inside and beyond Google, Richard will reflect on how the digital era shaped journalism, what platforms could have done differently, how publishers could have adapted, and what it means for the future of news. Tickets are on sale now, and since we're at Hot Docs, we'll supply the popcorn for what promises to be a thought-provoking evening. Now, before we get into today's panel, a quick note. We were originally scheduled to be joined by Amy Reinhart from the Associated Press, but unfortunately, she's been sidelined by flu season. We're sending her our best wishes for a speedy recovery. We are very grateful that Sonali Verma could step in and join us today. Sonali leads the International News Media Association's Newsroom Innovation Initiative, working with news organizations globally to turn AI into practical newsroom-ready tools. She advises publishers and trains journalists across North America and Europe, and previously she spent 15 years at the Globe and Mail. Joining Sonali on today's panel in Calgary, Christine Boyd, AI advisor at CBC Radio Canada's Transformation Office, helping Canada's public broadcaster navigate the intersection of generative AI and journalism. And here in Toronto, Nicholas Hune-Brown, executive editor of The Local and the 2025 recipient of the CJF's highest honor for excellence in local journalism. He'll share insights from his recent investigation that revealed a surprising AI twist in the newsroom. And guiding today's conversation is our moderator, Nikita Roy, journalist, data scientist, AI futurist, host of Newsroom Robots, and founder of Newsroom Robots Lab. We are honored to have all of you with us today. At a moment of profound change for journalism, it is my great pleasure to turn the conversation over to someone who helps newsrooms navigate both the promise and the pressure of this technology. Nikita, over to you.
Hello, everyone, and thank you so much, Natalie. And thank you to the Canadian Journalism Foundation for bringing us together to discuss what I think is the defining question for our industry right now. We are the beginning of 2026, and it's been nearly 3 years since ChatGPT was launched and kickstarted this generative AI era in the newsrooms. And I remember when it first arrived, there was panic. there was excitement. There were a lot of hypotheses on how this is going to change newsrooms and what this would mean for journalism. And so now, as we enter 2026, I think we are starting to see what the real picture is. And it's complicated, in my opinion. AI is no longer just a tool for us, it's becoming an infrastructure shift, and it's changing how newsrooms operate, definitely, but it's also changing the public information ecosystem, the way in which people are finding news, how they consume it, whether they even end up on our sites at all. And over the past year, that shift has been accelerated with Google's AI overviews now answering questions that used to drive traffic to news websites, ChatGPT now giving us personalized news briefings, AI being in your social media feeds, in your search results, and in places that you don't even realize. And all of a sudden, it's reshaping the entire relationship between journalism and the public we serve. Started as a conversation about AI as a tool for journalists has become something much bigger, a conversation about the business model of news, the future of how people get that information, and how newsrooms evolve. Those are all of the themes that I am very excited to explore today. And we have got three incredible people with very different perspectives to help us explore this. I want to start off, first of all, with understanding where are we with AI adoption in newsrooms and how are different newsrooms operating right now and approaching this moment in time. Christine, I'd love to start with you. You are navigating this at one of Canada's largest and most trusted news organizations at CBC. How has the CBC been adopting AI in today in 2026? How is it actually showing up in the newsroom?
I would say we are taking a conservative, deliberate, human-centered approach. We're not racing to replace journalists with AI. We're looking to empower them. So we have a CBC News AI strategy, and it has three core pillars. One is mandatory human oversight. Another is accuracy. A third is total transparency. So like the bottom line is that human oversight is mandatory. We want AI to be the tool, but never the creator in CBC News. So what's that mean? You're asking about workflow. We've seen two main areas of impact so far at CBC. One is accessibility. So we've used AI to automate closed captioning, say, to help us go from almost no to almost total closed captioning on our on-demand news videos on the web, or to provide speech versions of text of web stories. So those are accessibility wins. Those are massive wins that serve all Canadians. The other main area of impact, I'd say, is productivity. So some examples, news staff at the CBC are allowed to use AI to help them with things like initial research, to find information, to identify trends, say, in a massive data set or a huge document dump, to summarize documents, to transcribe an interview, or give a quick initial translation of a document in another language. But again, the caveat, we always treat AI like an unvetted source. Journalists still need to verify everything it produces. They need to check for bias. They need to apply their common sense, their journalistic experience. The other major impact is we're thinking about where do we lean in? Where do we double down on what AI can't do? So CBC is leaning into original journalism, investigative journalism, local journalism. AI can summarize a story, but it can't witness one. So that's a major competitive advantage for us as journalists. That's why CBC recently announced we're adding, 33 new journalists and 11 new bureaus this year. In fact, we'll have added over 60 boots on the ground reporters in communities across the country over 2 years. So I guess our strategy is simple. Use technology to free up our people to do more original, verified local journalism that only we, as humans can do.
And that's very encouraging to hear how it has been growing, especially in the local area. And Sonali, you just heard Christine describe where CBC is at, and you have this very unique global lens at INMA and working with newsrooms around the world and what's working, what's not. So I want to get your perspective. Where do you see the industry overall, and how are newsrooms approaching AI today?
Thank you. Yeah. So the journey we're on is a journey that every newsroom is on. Everyone is looking at this new technology and saying, what can I do with it that would help me reach audiences more effectively, reach new audiences? How can I make workflows more efficient? How can I take drudge work off my reporters' plates, for example? And we're seeing a lot of innovation there. So it all relies, as Christine pointed out, very heavily on this idea that AI is good at some things and humans are good at other things. And you must never conflate the two. So, for example, AI can do things that humans don't love doing and take a long time to do, like finding patterns in data or digging through thousands of documents to find out what happened somewhere. You see these popping up in, for example, the Pulitzer Prize nominations. You know, the Associated Press and the Howard Center at the University of Maryland undertook a 3-year investigation after George Floyd was killed to find out how many people the police kill when they're simply meant to restrain them. And so for this, their reporters received perhaps 200,000 documents and thousands of hours of police body camera footage. How does one go through that efficiently and actually find patterns? There's no database for this. The US government didn't track it. So they used optical character recognition to go through death certificates and autopsy reports. They used Textract, which is an Amazon tool, to transcribe all that body camera footage and then to look for cases to figure out what happened, right? If it took them 3 years with the technology, imagine how long it would have taken them without. So there's a case where it really helps you go faster and it helps you do powerful work that shapes society in a way that you wouldn't have been able to do otherwise. Other cases, CBC, as Christine said, translation is really popular. What I've seen that's really cool when you talk about accessibility is a couple of news organizations actually give the reader a slider on an article, and you have the choice of reading the article in easy language. So this is language without abbreviation, without jargons. It doesn't assume you have the same educational background as the journalist who wrote it. It's really good if you don't speak that as your first language and you're learning the language because you still have access to the news in a way that perhaps you wouldn't have had otherwise. And of course, speech to text and the other way around as well. Just getting through to people where they are at that moment in their day. I might have time to read the news in the morning, but in the evening when I'm cooking dinner and trying to get my kid to soccer, I really appreciate being able to listen to the news. So it's super, super useful in many ways, provided we use it intelligently.
So AI has been helping newsrooms across the world just use it and meet people where they are in different formats is what we're seeing with translation, different ways of text to speech and the other way around, as you were saying. And I want to get to you, Nick. Before we get into how AI is being used at the local, I actually want to start off with something about what you wrote last year. You dug into this story that actually sent shockwaves across the industry and also highlighted one of the biggest challenges that newsrooms are having to deal with today because of AI. You wrote a piece about how a freelancer who pitched to the local turned out to not be who they claimed they were, and they had published fabricated work at even major outlets like The Guardian. Can you walk us through what had happened and what it revealed about how vulnerable that newsrooms are right now because of AI?
Sure, happy to. So I'm the executive editor at the local. We're a small organization here, five journalists working into Toronto, trying to tell long form, in-depth stories from the city. I sent out a call for pitches in September and received a lot back. And one of them seemed promising from a writer with the byline Victoria Goldie, who had included some quotes and some interviews that she'd apparently done with local Toronto doctors and individuals here. After I Googled her, I saw that she'd written for a number of prominent publications, The Guardian, New York Magazine. So we thought about accepting this pitch. Something didn't quite sit right about it, and I kind of looked into it a little further. And Yeah, as I was doing that, we reached out to the doctor that she said she'd spoken to here, and that doctor said they'd never heard of her. Um, I kind of Googled the Canadian websites that she said she'd written for, along with her name, and saw that there were no search results. So I quickly understood that like this person had been probably using generative AI, sending a pitch filled with kind of made up quotes and made up perspectives. So that was shocking, I thought. I'd been fooled. I was a bit embarrassed by it. But then I considered like what accounted for the dozens of other articles she'd been publishing over the last 3 years in publications around the world. So I began doing some basic fact checking, emailing the professors, the designers, the architects, the public figures that were quoted in her articles, and realizing that they had never heard of her. The end result after a few weeks was I found that she had been, and I say she, I do not know who this person is at this point, right? It could be multiple people. It could be that the person or the people using the byline Victoria Goldie had published stories throughout the world that were made up, that were likely made up using generative AI. In the end, 4 stories were taken down at some major publications, a fifth one since. And in the wake of that, I heard from literally dozens of editors from publications, from the tiniest publication and reviewing books in Oakland to the biggest newspapers in Europe, who had all been pitched by this person. And that is something that obviously like would not have been possible even with the most ambitious scammer 5 years ago. So this is kind of a new world we're living in, and a new world that we at the local are trying to figure out how to deal with as we think about how to assign and how to do the journalism that we value.
Yeah. And as you said, you're a small local newsroom here in Toronto called The Local. And how has AI been making an impact, and what has this experience maybe changed in the newsroom?
It's changed a lot in the newsroom. It's made us, I mean, part of what we want to do is we want to bring new writers onto our pages. We want to bring in new voices. It is like our mandate to work with people who have great experiences, have great perspectives, don't necessarily have all of the, I don't have to know them. They don't have to have a million clips. A pitch used to be a kind of key that could open those doors, right? That's no longer the case. So we are constantly talking about how can we make sure that we're still able to do this work in a world where a pitch that you read is no longer intrinsically connected to the person who sent it, right? And we don't have big answers for that. I think it's going to take a lot more. I'm going to have more coffees with people. I am going to call the editors that people worked with previously. All of that makes her life a lot more difficult. That is AI making my life a lot harder and presenting like huge challenges for small newsrooms like us. And what that does for freelancers is kind of unimaginable. Like I do not know the next time I'm going to send out a call for pitches. I don't want to wade through 24 AI pitches again. If you were a freelancer starting out today, I don't have great advice for how you get past the dozens of kind of AI pitches that are filling every editor's inbox right now.
That is one of the big challenges that you're pointing out that we have to deal with that AI makes possible on the bad side for newsrooms and pitches. And the other aspect that always gets to me is with AI creating all of these realistic videos and images, that makes our life even harder. And I want to hear from you, Christine. How is the CBC approaching that?
You've nailed it. And by the way, Nick, great public service journalism by you and by the local on that. That's something that every journalist on this call, and hopefully many members of the Canadian public, are still reading and hearing about. But yeah, Nikita, you've nailed it. The verification burden is one of the biggest challenges of Gen AI for us as journalists and for the public, right? So I think I was actually involved. The CBC Radio Canada was part of a major international study mid-year last year by the European Broadcasting Union and the BBC. They led it, that suggested when AI chatbots are asked news questions, they misrepresent the facts nearly half the time. So think of that. What's that mean for us? So these kind of errors, hallucinations by AI, and the ability for deep fakes and disinformation. This increases our workloads as journalists, as Nick said, so much. We have to spend so much more time debunking and verifying. At the CBC, I mean, our fundamental principles haven't changed, right? Like, we're still prioritizing being right over being first. When it comes to editorial content, accountability is never going to be outsourced to an algorithm. You know, human verification is mandatory. But we've got a few new layers of defense. So we've specifically launched a visual verifications team on a network level, on a national level, that are people who specialize now in spotting deep fakes and AI slop. And the team really reinforces that principle that human verification is mandatory for all editorial content. In particular, much to the surprise of many of our colleagues, they emphasize that AI detectors are not reliable to make editorial decisions. So there are detectors out there, but in our team's opinion, there are too many false positives and too many false negatives. So we have to fall back on those standard analysis techniques like geolocation, source, content, technical analysis, you know, looking at metadata, looking at source code. And they're trying to, you know, raise the roof. Is that the right metaphor? They're training others across the corporation to be able to do the same. I'd say another prong is we're teamed up within the industry to push for content credentials, or C2PA, which I'm sure some of your listeners have heard of. But this is basically like a digital nutrition label. It uses cryptography to prove an image's origin and tell you if it's been manipulated by AI. And a third is AI literacy. So that's one of my top priorities as an AI advisor. We're trying to scale that out at CBC, starting with the top bosses, the C-suite on down. So we want our teams, we're training them to treat any AI output, treat AI like a potentially biased black box, whose output has to be treated like an unverified tip. So those are three ways we've pivoted to this new threat.
And I want to get into it a bit more about the AI literacy part that you were talking about. This obviously becomes one aspect of visual verifications, the threats that AI is bringing about at the CBC as well. What does AI literacy entail in its whole form across the organization?
Well, there are many different forms. Great question. I'm actually in the middle of teaching a full-day AI literacy course today. I took time out for the panel, but I've probably led with other trainers 20 plus of these sessions to more than 200 people at the CBC personally, mainly again, starting with our C-suite, the top bosses on down, news leaders, et cetera. And there's a similar initiative going on within our Radio Canada French colleague side. What it is might be really different when it comes to someone working in HR, say, or marketing and communications versus a frontline news journalist. But for the basic literacy, we want to go over core concepts, core jargon. We want to make sure they know some of the biggest possible risks, like hallucinations, like bias, like a concept called jagged intelligence, where, you know, sometimes the output of these AI tools, they seem like they're super geniuses, and then they fail some simple tests like how many R's in the word strawberry. We've seen multiple examples of that online. So we want to just make sure that we're educating staff about what can go wrong, as well as what can go right. We actually have some approved AI tools within the CBC. And so we actually get people very hands-on using those tools in the AI literacy training in various ways to explore what might be an acceptable use of it in their department or in their role, and what might not be. We go over the guidance. You know, the CBC has developed very robust guidance for staff, both corporation-wide and for individual departments. So CBC News has its own additional guidance for staff on how we can use AI and how we shouldn't use AI. For example, for audience-facing material, we can't use AI to create a web story from scratch, to create a TV script or a radio script or a video or an image that our audience would see. We would only do that in a very rare exceptional case that would have to get the highest level of sign-off from our Journalistic Standards and Practices Office and our editor-in-chief, and we would have to disclose it to our audiences and be transparent. So again, we're moving very cautiously. You know, once we do that basic AI literacy training, then people are getting into more advanced training and getting into, you know, we have committees looking diving down into more specifics and use cases of how can I use it in frontline news as a journalist doing an interview, say. I feel I'm starting to ramble, Nikita, so I'll pass the torch.
Absolutely. And that's so insightful. AI literacy is this foundation of AI adoption in newsrooms. And I think newsrooms are at different stages everywhere right now with how they're adopting AI.
Yeah, and I'll just add, we're not, I'm not here to be an evangelist and say, thou shalt always use AI, right? This is a choice by individual teams and departments within the parameters of the guidelines. Some writers I work with never want to use it on their stories, and some might find it helpful in certain permitted contexts. But again, it always comes down to the human being the ultimate overseer, and that these are tools. They are not the creator of our content.
And we are also dealing with this as a technology that's not just affecting journalism, it's affecting every single beat. And so wherever and whatever you're doing, it has some sort of an impact. AI is being sold as this new tool that you can use with an existing feature, as an existing feature. And so I think that knowledge is just the foundation everyone's needing to have. And that's exactly what you've been trying to do at CBC. I want to get, Sonali, your perspective into this. Working with so many of these global newsrooms, you see different approaches to AI adoption and AI literacy. What's working and what doesn't?
So the one thing that really works is to have the people for whom you're building the tools involved in building it. In other words, if your product and tech team is like, oh, well, wouldn't it be great if journalists could do this? And they build something and then they take it to the newsroom. And the newsroom's like, yeah, I can't see myself using this. Why on earth would you build this? Compared to having your product person sit with a journalist, or whether it's a reporter or an editor, and say, okay, let me just sit with you for the day and let me just see when you start swearing. What is the painful part of your job that you wish could be easier or faster or more convenient? And then to take that idea away and build a tool that addresses that pain point. Those are the most successful ones because you're solving real problems that people have, and they're grateful to you that you've done something that'll actually make their lives easier. So there are a few examples of how this has worked really well. I'm thinking of a Norwegian publisher called Amedia here, where there's this big parade that happens every year, and the reporter needed a tool to understand the program better because it's like this massive program. Well, you can build something like that within minutes in AI, and you don't need to be an expert coder for that. So someone in the newsroom actually built it for him, not a technologist. And he's like, oh, well, this is great. And then you can repurpose that tool for other uses because you're not the only one in the newsroom trying to wade through a lot of information and understand what's important. Other examples of this are tools that, for example, will listen in on a meeting like city council. And suppose you're the reporter covering school lunches and you want to know if anything is said about school lunches at city council. The machine will listen in and it'll actually flag for you by sending you an alert in Slack where you're already working. Oh, they mentioned nutrition, they mentioned nourishment, they mentioned words that aren't even strictly speaking school lunch as a keyword, but semantically related. And it'll tell you the timestamp so you can go back and listen to the recording and see exactly where what was interesting for you was mentioned. So again, you don't have to sit through 5 hours of meetings. This is something that reporters asked to be built. Those tend to be the best examples. We all became journalists to change the world. Nobody became a journalist to spend all their time transcribing, right? Though I will say, in the case of the city council, what AI doesn't know is what wasn't said. So sometimes the omission is the news. When you ask someone a question and they say, oh, well, it's A, B, and C, and you're like, wait a second, you were elected saying that D is the most important thing for us to do. So that's where your experience as a journalist comes in. That's where you have knowledge and judgment that the machine does not have. So you can't rely on it to do everything for you, but you can use it as an assistant to help you do stuff that you kind of already know the answer to.
Absolutely. And I think that's so crucial understanding where the gaps are that AI has and where can it help, where can you leverage it to help you with your work. And Nick, I'd love to hear from your perspective, running a small team. Has AI been able to make an impact in the way you're working? And if so, how?
Um, I've discussed the negative side of things already, and I think that's a big concern, even beyond that, with traffic and kind of our ability to get our stories out there. In terms of the positive, we have not found a good use for AI within the kind of journalism that we do, which granted is we do long form magazine journalism. When we are writing a series of stories about the northwest of Toronto, our entire newsroom goes up there. We meet with communities, we walk around. This is before we're even assigning stories. We have AI guidelines. I think some of the examples I've heard from some of these panelists around data analysis, of course, transcription, all that. We are open to all of that, but we don't really see a place for generative AI in the journalism that we produce. And I think part of that is like there are lots of reasons for that, but even as a simple business case, I think that differentiating the kind of work we do and producing work that cannot be made using AI is a useful place for us to be. Like trying to land on a very narrow edge where I am using the same AI tools as everyone to produce something that I swear is a little better because I'm an experienced journalist. That feels like a tougher sell to than saying that no, we are offering perspectives, human perspectives. We're creating original material that you cannot find using AI.
And Sonali, have you found different approaches to AI? As we are seeing over here, we have CBC leaning into AI, and we have the local really centering around the principles of the human value in journalism. Have you seen those examples across globally?
I think both you and Nick put your finger on it when you talked about value. What is it, and when you talked about differentiation, Nick, what is it that you do that nobody else does? Why do people come to you instead of simply getting their news from AI overviews or from ChatGPT Pulse or from whatever is summarizing your inbox these days? Why would they come to your site or your app? What is it that you do differently? And as Nick said, there are some places where that human connection is just incredibly important. Local journalism is one of them. Whereas if you work at a much bigger newsroom where you're trying to do a lot of things, you're trying to serve many different audiences in many different ways, then AI can help you transform your content so that it's more suitable for different audiences. But, and I think you said this, or maybe Christine did, it cannot go out and do that original shoe leather reporting. And I've worked as an editor. If I get wind of a big story going down, I'm not going to ask the machine to phone sources. I will go to a seasoned reporter who's spent years cultivating and nurturing those relationships and say, hey, what's going on here? And their sources will speak to them. They won't speak to the algorithm, right? Similarly, if there's a natural disaster, you're not going to get the machine to ask sensitive questions with empathy. For that, you need a human, right? And they also know when to stop asking questions, which I have to say, AI does not know. It often asks good questions, but it doesn't know when to stop. So for anything requiring judgment, sensitivity, that human connection, it makes so much sense that humans do the work. And I think we've all seen cases where news businesses are now forcing themselves to think about what it is that differentiates themselves. And in many cases, it is the humans. In my CBC newsletter, for example, this morning, I saw there was a box that said behind the scenes of Canada Reads. And it was a first person account by the person who's running the competition saying, oh, here's how the process works. Here's what we have to go through to do it. So you're kind of inviting the reader in this case behind the curtain, behind the velvet rope, and saying, look, let me tell you, this is how we get our information. This is how we make our news, which you don't get with that anonymous black box in which you don't know what the inputs are. You get one version of the output, and if you run the question again, you get a different version of the output. So it comes back to trust, and I think that is where we in the news business really have to distinguish ourselves, that we have to build that connection, which local news does really well and which a larger publisher might have trouble building without undertaking things like this.
Absolutely. And that's exactly it. How do we differentiate ourselves in this new AI mediated information ecosystem? And what is the new value that we are creating when something that people equate to news, me getting my updates, now is something that I can get as a summary from ChatGPT? And I want to just bring up a slide that we have, which is about ChatGPT Pulse. It is currently only available in the $200 version of ChatGPT, which, if you follow how they have been doing over the past year, they'll roll out features in their most premium version and then roll it out across the newsroom, or across the product line. And so they make it free. Later on, they make it free. So I just feel like it's a matter of time until something like this becomes available to people. It's a proactive, personalized form of AI, not that chatbot version where you have to go and ask the news. But when I go into my chat GPT every day, it's like out there just blinking, being like, check out your pulse for the day. And I check it and I get this whole personalized news briefing. And this is kind of what it looks like. It's just something from a screenshot I'd taken from the fall. So it's like telling me about transit issues that are happening, what the weather of the day could look like. It knows that I'm into AI in journalism. And in the next slide of this, it's telling me about, here's what's happening in AI. It knows that I'm going to be traveling to Germany. And it's like, hey, here are the delays that are happening probably at the border crossing that you might have to deal with. I can click on this, have a conversation with it. I can also at the same time go and have this back and forth via by text or by voice. But most concerning for me is every single day when I go in and look at this is essentially tech companies are acting like a news publisher at this point in time. They are obviously scraping from news sources, which for us as Canadians right now should be very concerned that because most of the Canadian news publishers are suing OpenAI, none of the top Canadian news publishers show up over here. So instead, what you have is the sources are government websites, they are foreign news sources, or some sort of local blogs or local newsrooms that haven't blocked ChatGPT in this case. What happens to our cultural sovereignty when it is not a Canadian news publisher telling a Canadian news story at this point in time? What happens when it is a foreign AI company becoming that editorial layer, telling a Canadian news story to our Canadians? And Christine, I want to bring that question to you for CBC. What happens when CBC just does not exist now in this layer where people are getting a personalized news briefing? 800 million weekly active users are on ChatGPT, but we are having just a gap of Canadian news publishers being a part of that story. And how are you thinking about that challenge?
That's a great question, and I share your concern. You know, I think that generative search is an existential threat to our traditional models of newsroom publishing. When we have things like you've mentioned, you know, AI overviews and chatbots and Pulse and other tools becoming a primary source of news for Canadians or for people around the world. I think the Reuters annual study of journalism last year found for the first time that chatbots were becoming a significant source of news for people around the world, about 7% of people in general. And in that crucial younger market of 25 and under, I think it leaped to 15%. And no doubt it has increased massively since then. But I don't think people are aware of the kind of things that you just mentioned, Nikita. I don't think the average Canadian, if I ask my mom or my neighbor, I don't think they would have the intel to know, oh, well, most major Canadian publications are not being represented in Pulse right now, et cetera. So rather than weigh in on the business models of foreign companies or government policy, what I would say is this. You know, I'll focus on the promise we make to Canadians at the CBC. We're going to lean in, and we are leaning in to being a home for trusted, fact-based journalism. There's more stuff. There's more AI noise coming at us than ever before. So we want CBC to be a safe harbor. And like Sonali was saying, we want to focus on what algorithms can't do. You know, AI can't sit in a coffee shop and earn the trust of a whistleblower. AI can summarize a report, but it can't, you know, go to Jasper, Alberta and stand on the front lines of that fire and capture the grief of a community. Accountability, you know, CBC News is publicly accountable. We have an independent ombudsman. We've rolled out our AI, our CBC News AI guidance, not just to staff, but we've published that for the world to see. So we're being very transparent. And our investment in local bureaus, you know, ensures that Canadian perspective isn't drowned out by global synthetic content.
And I think that leads to a big challenge. We're pointing out we still need journalism, obviously, and journalists still need to be there. But what's really been impacting now is that AI is affecting the distribution of that public information. So even if it is a CBC journalist that breaks the story and works hard and gets that, AI is able to synthesize that and maybe get that out to somewhere else from another aspect, and that leads to no click-through to a
Well, it's
website.
such a good point. Like when we were involved with the EBU BBC-led study of when the top chatbots were asked news questions, much of the time, not just in some of the tools you've mentioned specifically, but in general, these chatbots don't necessarily show you the source or show it in an obvious way. And a lot of the times the sources for those summaries are not ones that I, as a journalist, would have considered a legitimate original source.
Exactly. And I think that's pointing to a bigger aspect of it impacting the business model of news as well, as we've seen with especially the Google AI overview is impacting traffic. Sonali, how have you seen newsrooms approach this particular threat to this revenue stream of people coming to a website, that expectation that people will come and click through to you? How are newsrooms approaching that?
So I've seen a couple of examples where they're working on the user experience to make it more intuitive and more fluid so that it feels more like you're talking to an answer engine. Because, hey, people like talking to answer engines. So Time Magazine, for example, has this chatbot, which is actually like, they'll tell you it's a multi-agent system where you can ask it, hey, tell me everything you've written about this Brazilian football team over the past 30 years and give me an audio version in Portuguese. So you can ask it like complicated questions and you can ask it to do many things. They're kind of hoping that in this way, their journalism stays front and center, but the experience that a user gets is good enough that it keeps them coming back. Another thing I've really seen is this focus on brand. People pushing their brand front and center and saying, okay, let's just remind people what we do, or why we do it, or that human differentiation, so that they know they're hearing the voice of a columnist that they really trust on a matter that matters to them, right? On an issue that really matters to them, rather than just anonymized summaries of whatever we're talking about. But there is a lot of concern, a lot of panic over search traffic drying up because, frankly, a lot of news businesses are built on this idea of scale and advertising. And in the future, it might get even worse because it may not be humans coming to your site to read your content. And so that changes your business model. So right now you have an article page with a banner ad and a box ad, and someone comes, they read an article, they click on the ad to buy a pair of shoes, and you do well. Well, in the future, you might have one agent to go and read and summarize your news for you, and you might have another agent to go and buy your shoes for you. So there's this disconnect between what you're showing me and what's actually going on and how you actually monetize. So there's a lot of conversation also around how to make money off the tech companies. So obviously there are a lot of lawsuits underway, but most news companies expect some sort of licensing agreement or some sort of compensation for their content over the next few years. So they're hoping to get paid for it. Let's see how the lawsuits play out. They're still kind of working their way through the court system right now. And then there are other sources of revenue that people are looking at. That, okay, so I'm not going to get search traffic anymore. Social traffic dried up a long time ago, especially for us in Canada. What can I count on? How about events? Events are one stream of revenue where, again, you can't put the AI behind the micro. You need to put your journalists front and center, whether they're editors or reporters, and show people how the sausage is made so that they feel like it's worth going out on a cold snow evening to listen to someone talk about it.
Yeah. And I want to pass this question to Nick as well, because I think you have a unique position being a local newsroom, having that connection with the community. As you said, when you're going and just even looking at covering a story, you are out there in the community connecting with people. So how concerned are you about what you are seeing with the changes in this distribution and the interface layer that is happening with AI? And how are you thinking about the business model?
Yeah, I'm incredibly concerned about it. It feels conversations like these are kind of funny, right? To me, it feels as if there's this like comet heading towards journalism, and we're kind of discussing some of the ways that maybe some of the resources that it brings we could find useful in what we're doing. Um, yeah, the kind of decimation of kind of Google search results. You see a bunch of different numbers from different places. Let's say it's a third. I don't know many businesses that can withstand a third of their business going out the door, right? So that's devastating. The local, we are a nonprofit, so we're not ad dependent, so we are in a relatively good position, and I think this is one of the future models of journalism that can kind of survive this AI revolution. It's not it's not an answer that will replace everything that we will lose, though. Um, but as a nonprofit, like we are still dependent on uh, actually getting people to read our material. Like every year or every Toronto municipal election, we are the only publication that do full biographies and fact-checked platform analysis of every single candidate. That takes so much time, so much money. It feels like an important thing for democracy. When we do that this year and someone Google's who their local ward candidate is, they will not go to our page. They will see an AI summary of that. They will not click through and see that we've done some other interesting coverage in Toronto. They won't maybe sign up for our newsletter. Maybe some portion of them will even become donors. That avenue is increasingly going to be cut off for publications. So yeah, I'm worried about that. I'm worried about what the future of that looks like. And I don't have great answers, unfortunately.
Yeah, I agree with you. It does feel like this comet's headed towards us. And we're all figuring out different paths right now as to what would work. But I also want to just get into some of the audience questions that we've been getting, which have been some very interesting ones. And one that I think we need to touch upon is about early career journalists. So Jonathan asks, what skills should an early career journalist prioritize, and what classic skills might become obsolete with AI? Nick, I'd love to hear from you and your perspective. What are you seeing?
Um, I'll just think about what I'm trying to prioritize. I mean, I think still people with classic investigative skills are incredibly valuable. Like, um, if you can use new technology and bring that to bear on like the normal work of journalism of finding things that are new and telling them to an audience, like I think that's still, yeah, incredibly valuable.
Yeah. Christine, the CBC is having a lot of ways in which AI is helping journalists now. And sometimes you probably could say tasks that the early career journalist would have to do. And so how do you see the skills evolving for what early career journalists need?
Well, we might be offloading some of the mundane tasks, but the core journalism skills, like Nick was saying, judgment, critical thinking, the experience you get from reporting in the weeds, I would say those are more needed than ever. And that's one reason why I think CBC and CBC News has been moving perhaps more slowly than some news organizations, to make sure we get this right. We want to ensure rookie journalists or new staff still develop the foundational reporting skills they're going to need. Like I have a colleague whose first journalism job was transcribing interviews. And you can imagine she learned so much about the art and craft of the interview by transcribing the work of veteran reporters around her. But now we can use tools to transcribe an interview. So, how does a junior reporter learn those skills? Reporting you have to do the work to build up the gut. But in terms of the question, in terms of skills for new journalists, we're looking for people who have some level of AI literacy. We're looking for editorial accountability still, taking ownership of the entire process and knowing you need to treat AI output like an unvetted source and vet it for bias, vet it for hallucinations. But again, having that critical thinking to see the human narrative that an algorithm would miss. Like basically, we need pilots, not passengers.
That's a good one.
You could quote that.
Yeah. We have another question, and Sonali, I think I'd love to get your take on this as well. Lindsay asks, how can we square with the ethics of the climate impact of AI with the desires of capital in the news organization?
$1 million question. I mean, I haven't seen huge progress when it comes to environmentally efficient ways to undertake AI use. There's no question at the moment that it's a huge suck on resources, whether it's electricity or water or, frankly, all these minerals that end up going into creating the chips. The environmental impact is horrific. I guess the question that most news organizations are asking is, can we afford to stand here and wring our hands over that while everyone else uses it and gets ahead? And that's why we're seeing what we're seeing.
It's a tough dilemma facing everyone in newsrooms.
Yeah,
Right?
I haven't seen any good solutions to it.
Absolutely. There's another question. I think, Christine, would love to get your perspective. Laura asks, how would you recommend we structure an organization to both squeeze AI in the newsroom for all that it's worth, but also create the right checks and balances for its dangers?
Oh, good question, Laura. Well, I think it comes back. I mean, that's why at the CBC, we've got a top level steering committee on AI corporation wide. And then we've got a CBC News steering committee, and we've got corporate wide guardrails. And we've made those public. And then each department or various departments have found it useful to develop further guidance for staff. And we're always talking about specific use cases among news leaders. Well, we may say it's okay to use it sometimes for summarization, for example, but what does that mean? Can we use it to summarize an article and publish that for audiences? Or does it mean I can use it to summarize a report and get a quick first take that I then, drill down on, that I look at the original source and evaluate for myself? So I think our every news organization is going to have to develop its own guidance, but also that guidance is going to keep changing as AI tools and technology are changing so quickly. No one has all the answers right now. We have to figure this out together on the fly. And luckily, we as journalists are very good at figuring things out on the fly, I think. But I again, coming back to the CBC in particular, I think our strategy is quite simple. Again, we always want to keep as a bedrock being a safe harbor for fact-based journalism, trusted, human-led Canadian journalism. So using technology to free up people to do more original, verified work, more local work that only a human can do.
Absolutely. And we have another question that Warren asks, could the panelists describe how AI in the newsroom is impacting revenue, either as a cost-saving tool or creating new and/or improved monetization? Or I would add, if it's negatively impacting the revenue as well because of the AI overviews. What have you been seeing? Let's get Sonali from maybe a global lens. What have you heard?
Sure. So what I've seen, you're right. So AI overviews are impacting traffic. Licensing deals, we've already talked about. All of these have an impact on revenue. One thing I've seen is new products being created that can be monetized. So for example, there's Nikkei, the Japanese publishing giant that does hardcore business and financial news. They produce 1,000 articles a day. They charge $30 a month for this. And what they discovered in their market research is that there's a segment of people who are interested in business news, but they don't want to spend that kind of money. They don't have the time or the expertise to read so much content or such in-depth content. And so what Nikkei does now is every day they get an editor to pick 3 topics, and they run AI over all of Nikkei's coverage on those three topics. It produces 3 articles, not too long, audio versions as well. An editor looks it over, and then they package this up and sell it for $7 a month. So they were worried it might cannibalize their core audience, but what they found is no, these are people who would never sign up at that price point for that kind of content. This is an entirely new segment that they're able to both reach and monetize. So there's a success story for you, you know? It's something you would never hire someone to sit down and read through hundreds of articles and then rewrite them in easy language, right? But the machine will do it for you at very little marginal cost and create for you revenue that can then be plowed back into your journalism.
Absolutely. So creating new product lines. Christine, has there been any impact on revenue from AI that you've seen?
Well, that's sort of outside my area of expertise at the CBC, I must say, but I know certainly in looking at other organizations, some have been very upfront at saying they're already seeing, as Sonali noted, a big dip in their traffic, their web traffic, due to these chatbots. So the Washington Post has done some coverage on that and others. But I would say other than that, I don't have hard figures to tell you on that one for the CBC itself.
Yeah. And Nick, I think there's a question just for you. Angad asks, is there still a place for long-form text-based journalism for younger audiences?
Yes, yes, there is. I hope so. That's my whole career is that. But no, the stories that we published at the local, we just looked at our last year's numbers, and the biggest stories were all some of our biggest investigations, your 5,000, 6,000 word stories, stories that readers spent time with, they've shared, they got picked up by other outlets. We find that every year that like when we invest in a story and if we nail it, that story can still find an audience. So that's encouraging to me. And yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I think journalism as such is not going to disappear, and how we have been consuming information for the past is not going to disappear, but there's different ways in which maybe it's going to just be added to that. And I think one final question that I'd love to get everyone's perspective on is Lindsay asks, what are some guardrails we might put in place to help assure that readers that they can trust our work? Christine, how are you maintaining that trust at the CBC?
Great question, Lindsay. Yeah, well, some of the initiatives I've already mentioned, I think, play into it. Doing AI literacy with staff so they're more familiar with how these tools work and what some of the risks are, like, again, hallucinations, bias, et cetera, can really help us. So to an earlier question, too, I do think AI literacy is a basic for not just all journalists, but most companies these days in general. Having someone like the visual verifications team within the CBC to help us spot deep fakes and AI slop and train others to do the same. And also sharing that, as we already have been doing, sharing that expertise with the public in our storytelling, educating the public as we unveil deep fakes and talk about AI slop. Content credentials, again, I mentioned earlier, that digital nutrition label that can help you determine is an image fake or not. So those are just a couple of layers of defense, I think. But the big one, I think, is we need to keep talking about it, and we need to have these conversations with the public, not just amongst ourselves as journalists. People are overwhelmed by the flood of AI slop and deep fakes. They don't know where to go to get trusted, reliable information. It's our job to help show them what we're doing so that they can trust our content.
Absolutely. And Sonali, we'd just love to get a quick take from you. How do we put in guardrails for especially audience-facing experiences?
So first of all is your own internal processes. I mean, humans are the last gate. I've heard the 80-20 rule that you can use the machine to do 80% of the work, but for the remaining 20%, at the beginning of the process to ask the right question, and at the end to vet the output and say, well, does this look reasonable? So tell your readers about it, be transparent about the process, and don't just put your policy of where you're going to use AI and where you're not going to use it in some quiet place on your website. put it on any article that uses AI. People are remarkably open to using AI, news consumers as well. You know, they may not mind if the weather story is written by a machine, but they probably don't want their editorial written by the machine, right? For that, they're hoping to draw on the big brains at your news brand. So tell them when you're using it, tell them when you're not using them, tell them what you will and won't do with it. There's a lot of trust in AI too, you know, a lot of mistrust, but a lot of trust as well.
Absolutely. And so, as we covered today, I think there's a lot of challenges to our business model, the new challenges to the verification of journalism that we have, but a lot of hope as well as CBC is expanding its local coverage. Nick still has his long form journalism on the ground, that community connection is still so important, but also at the same time, new ways in maybe which AI is driving new products that newsrooms are able to meet their audience with. And we are at time. And thank you so much, Christine, Sonali, and Nick, for such a wonderful, thoughtful conversation, and to the Canadian Journalism Foundation for bringing us together. And thank you to everyone watching and for your questions.